Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, I'm Kitamura from Sony, in charge of the semiconductor AI sensor business as a business development manager. It's really a pleasure to be here to talk to you guys today. I think as 99% of the people in this room wonder why Sony is here. Unfortunately, we are not making this the sexy carb space management PlayStation game, but we are here to provide the new semiconductor solution for edge AI camera. So Sony is actually the largest semiconductor manufacturer of the eye sensor for the digital camera, and we've been doing this for the last 50 years and over the 60% market share. So new development, new innovation related to the digital camera capturing part historically come out from Sony. So we are kind of setting the trend of the technology in this space. The reason why I'm here today is to share the new innovation in the AI camera space. What is new is so last 50 years, we've been developing the sensor only for capturing the image. So capturing the optical signal, converting to the digital. That's what we've been doing for the last 50 years. For the first time, last 50 years, we developed a new functionality on top of the capturing, which is the AI processing. So now you have capture the image and an AI process. So eye and brain combine into single chip for scalable AI cameras. So that's what Karina talked about this morning, the scalable solution. And because of this new technology, you will have three things. One is a simple the AI cameras at the site. So you don't need to have any additional equipment at the site. Simple is the best friend for this scalable installation. Second is low power. Because it's a semiconductor one-chip solution, you can drive these cameras with solar batteries easily. Also, we are now integrating with a street light, taking the power from the luminaire because it's a low power consumptions. That helps you to manage your budget for this total cost of ownership of the installation. Three is the privacy. You capture the anonymized data in a single chip. So you don't need to transfer any personal identifiable information to other place. So highly privacy protected system. So that's the new technology we developed. And I like to learn the challenge for these industries. And then I like to collaborate with you to develop the co-create the solution for car management, traffic counting, traffic management, and the road safety, Vision Zero, which is the next topic subject. Now I'd like to introduce the next sessions, the Andrew, for talking about the road safety.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for staying with us. Thanks for continuing to be here and engaging in I'm probably biased, but what I think is going to be one of the best discussions of the day. Mostly because it's a discussion that each and every one of us experiences in one way or another as we move around through our daily lives, either as a pedestrian, or if we're riding a bike, or if we're driving a car, or if we're riding public transit. Safety is paramount. And yet we're currently in a system that is unsafe, where there's 40,000 or more deaths, road-related deaths on our streets in the United States every year. As much technology and as much change and innovation as we've brought to urban mobility, this is a problem we have not been able to solve so far. And yet we can solve it. We just have to do things a little bit differently. It's well within our reach. And so before I get started, my name's Andrew Hastings. I'm the executive director of the Open Mobility Foundation. I realized I forgot to introduce myself this morning, so apologies there. But really, I do think this is going to be a super interesting, engaging conversation We're not going to necessarily solve the safety crisis that we have on streets today, but I think we're going to dig into some of the opportunities that we have as it relates to innovation and data sharing for urban mobility and some of the safety issues that we experience every day. So I mentioned in my remarks this morning that safety was going to be one of the themes that we would come back to kind of again and again throughout the day and in conversations ongoing, especially as it relates to the mobility data specification in CDS. But I wanted to talk really quick before I introduce this amazing panel to my right. I wanted to talk about MDS and the connection to safety. So MDS, up until now, has been used by cities around the world to manage shared mobility systems and the exchange of information, both receiving information about the vehicles and the operations on the street, and then being able to share digital policy out. But MDS, up until now, has not included fields of data related to crashes. And we now have the opportunity to add crash-related fields into MDS so that the stakeholders have a better sense of what's happening on a street as it relates to shared mobility. But that's not good enough. We need to take MDS to more vehicles, to more places on the streets, which is why the Open Mobility Foundation is focused on expanding MDS beyond just shared modes of transportation and really getting at all modes of transportation, what I like to call MDS at the intersection. That's what we want to build. We want to build the future digital language for cities to understand not just the shared bikes and scooters and taxis and car share vehicles, but all vehicles, whether you're in a car, a truck, whether you're riding a bicycle, walking, pushing a stroller, or in a wheelchair. That's where we need to get so that there's a better understanding of all the activity that's happening on city streets. All right, with that in mind, I want to take a moment and introduce our incredible panel here and dive right into the discussion. So I'm going to start on my far right here. Ryan Russo, the executive director of NACTO. We have Viktoriya Wise, the chief of streets for the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Authority or agency? Agency. All right. Laura Rubio Cornejo, you heard from earlier today, the general manager of the LA DOT, and Brian Simmons, who is. What is your actual title, Brian? You're the chief engineer of surface transportation for the MITRE Corporation.
That's right.
All right, there we go. Okay, so with that, I'm going to let each of them tell you a little bit more about who they are and what they do, especially in this space related to safety data. And I'm going to start. I'm going to go back over here to Ryan, and I'm going to prompt you with a question here, Ryan, that you can then expand upon and tell us a little bit more about who you are and what NACTO is doing in this space. But getting at this issue of safety data in particular. So NACTO is in a pretty unique position of representing a broad cross-section of cities and transit agencies across the United States and even agencies up in Canada, working towards certainly safe streets as a priority. What are your members' big concerns with regard to safety data in particular? And then the kicker here is, how does last week's election change those concerns?
Great. Thank you very much. And thanks to the OMF for inviting me here. As you heard, I'm Ryan Russo, Executive Director of NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials. And I'm here with two of our members, SFMTA and LADOT, and there's a number of members here and participating in OMF. And what we do is we try to clear the path for these cities to do the work on the ground in the rights of way to make our streets equitable, safe, sustainable. And we often represent their interests in the debates in Washington. We've been fighting for more money for local governments to implement safe streets. There have been a number of innovative programs that have come out of the bipartisan infrastructure law that have been very pro-city. It has been a very pro-city administration at the Biden-Harris administration. And it's been really exciting to see cities step up and raise their hands and say, we want these federal resources to put to work to serve our communities. There's been a lot of challenges, but basically I think what we have to really recognize is that all of that is kind of under threat with the transition that we're going to be facing. And specifically for this audience, local governments really have had to raise their voices to get the attention. Remember, we're 2 steps removed from the federal government, where all the authority and all the money is, frankly. The money has historically gone to the states, who haven't really been necessarily city-friendly places. State DOTs like to widen highways and build interchanges, and the money doesn't go to the local governments. We don't expect to see a particularly city and government-friendly administration. And so when we're talking about private-public partnerships together, we're really losing, in essence, an upper hand in that push-pull between the private and the public. And I really want to ask this community to recognize that, this is not a chance to sort of say, hey, they're down, we can get away with what we want in the cities now from the technology and the private side, because we have a tech-friendly administration as opposed to a government-friendly administration. Instead, you should realize that having a strong partner on the government level is beneficial for the outcomes that you want to see on the private side as well. So I'd really like this audience to be thinking about how they can, if cities are gutted, if they have to, if the budgets are tight, the chief innovation officer might be a position that gets eliminated at our members. They won't be able to do some of the things that we'd like to see together, but we need that strong government partner in order to do these types of things that you'll hear about our cities that they're doing.
Great, thanks, Ryan. Viktoriya, so in San Francisco, the director of streets, that's an incredible role. So much is happening on the streets of San Francisco. Measure K just passed. I'm sure you could talk a whole panel on what Measure K means from a streets and public space perspective. But you also are working with a lot of data that you're receiving, but also data or information that you're sharing. How is that exchange of information helping you and ultimately the city address Vision Zero, create safer streets?
Thank you for that question. Good afternoon, everybody. It's so good to be here. Thank you for having me. And yes, Ryan, Andrew, that's exactly right. So in a position at the streets, I think about it in 2 different buckets in terms of data. There's data that I'm collecting, that I am ingesting to do my Vision Zero work, and then there's data I'm putting out. When it comes to ingesting data, there's been so much, and we have been at the forefront of Vision Zero, where we have used data to create a high injury network, where we see 12% of streets where 68% of our fatal crashes and injuries occur, and that is where we have been targeting our work. And so we have used the data to figure out where to put our limited resources in Vision Zero, whether it's daylighting, whether it's lead pedestrian intervals on that high injury network. And speaking of which, Laura, you mentioned this earlier, automated speed enforcement. We are both doing it. I'm so excited to announce that is going to be live in San Francisco in early 2025. So we're excited to see how that technology is going to help us deliver Vision Zero, because I think this group very well knows that speed is one of the top causalities of fatalities and injuries. And so we're excited to see what that's going to bring and what kind of change that is going to bring in terms of our fatality numbers. Because frankly, I have to say they have been keeping steady, and that's been difficult to deliver the message to our public, where we're investing resources on the high injury network. They've given us these resources, and then the fatalities stay the same. I always want to offer and say, the rest of the nation is actually going up, so we're holding steady, but that's not good enough. We have to reach zero. So also ingesting data for evaluation. And this is so critical to convincing members of the public about the worth of the projects that we're doing. It got talked at the top of our day today about how critical it is to tell stories and to justify what we're doing and why it's important, and how we can use data strategically to share the stories and successes that we have had with our Vision Zero program. So we have a massive evaluation program, and I can tell you right now that in corridors where we've implemented protected bike lanes, or what we call in San Francisco quick build projects, I'm seeing an upwards of a 30% reduction in collisions and fatalities. It's huge, right? But that's data and that's storytelling and that's moving forward. And then also on the flip side, on the safety, it's putting out our own data. So 3 years ago, we started out putting data as it relates to our traffic permits for construction. So that's construction roadway protection, right? So people know there's construction going on here. Special events, when we have street closures, parades, and in San Francisco, we party a lot, lots of joy. We do, it's true. And so lots of things going on. How do we tell people about that for safety operations on our streets? And in fact, more recently, our emergency services, so that's planned, right? But then there's unplanned emergencies. And so how do we communicate to our autonomous vehicles on our streets when we have an emergency situation? And so we've been recently giving that out to them. And I have to say, I'm very happy that they're using it. And so these are some of the data, the way that we've been using data to really focus on safety.
Okay, really quick, because I think it's fascinating. Measure K. What does it mean for San Francisco and for, especially from the safety perspective, in advancing your goals in that area?
Thank you so much for asking that. For those of you that don't know, Measure K just passed, and that has to do with closure of something known as the Great Highway. If you have ever been in San Francisco, you might know right along the Pacific Ocean on the west side of the city, we have 2 miles plus of 2-lane Great Highway. When the pandemic happened, we closed that up so that people had an opportunity to basically socialize, walk, and exercise. Post-pandemic, we opened it up during weekdays, and it's still closed on weekends. And I think the city's been, frankly, divided as to whether that should continue or how that should be handled. And so this past week, in fact, on Friday, it got called. It was 3 days of nail biting. But the San Francisco population wanted to close that roadway. And I think it speaks to a cultural change that is slow, but that we are seeing around streets and how we use them for being in community, for socializing, for exercising, and for something other than the vehicle, and frankly, for taking joy. Mm-hmm. And so I have to say, I'm very excited about it, and at the same time, nervous because there's going to be significant amounts of pressure to mitigate some of the recirculation of the traffic with traffic calming, with any number of different features to ensure that we continue to stay safe.
Thanks. Brian, I'm going to jump to you. All right, so the MITRE Corporation, a recent, new, and I like to think blossoming partnership with the OMF, but probably not necessarily a household name. Can you tell us a little more about MITRE and about your work in this area of road safety? And then specifically, what are the challenges of operating a data-driven DOT?
Sure. And thanks. This is my first conference here, so I'm thrilled to be here. And absolutely, hearing the OMF vision resonates so strongly with us at MITRE. We have very different missions, but the vision is very much the same. So MITRE is not a mobility provider, nor are we a standards organization. MITRE Corporation has been around for 60 years, and we operate laboratories for the government. We're a nonprofit organization, nonprofit company. We don't sell any products, but we do operate research laboratories for the federal government. And, central to what MITRE is trying to do is to accelerate the adoption of beneficial new technology. So we're a technology company monitoring the pure research that's being done in academia and industry, and really trying to marry that up to the mission needs of federal government. How do they interpret a new disruptive technology? How does it fit in? How might it threaten their mission? And so that's really what a lot of our research is. So at our heart, we're trying to accelerate beneficial technology. And so we're studying, lots of buzzwordy sorts of technologies out there these days. But certainly autonomous systems, intelligent transportation systems, those sorts of things is definitely in our space. As we try to accelerate the adoption of technology in our nation for lots of reasons, right? Global competitiveness, economic advantage, safety, delivering benefits to citizens. What we really see in our work was stated well by Karina this morning. We need a pathway to scalability. That's really where MITRE is trying to work. We're not doing the pure research types of things, but now that we have the benefit of so many demonstrations, pilot programs, so much research, the technology that we're all talking about is pretty mature technology, pretty well understood. So how do we get it scalable? How do we deploy it at scale, nationwide, move it into permanent operations? That's really where we're focused. And a lot of that has to do with translating requirements. One piece of work that we're engaged in right now, not specifically relevant maybe to MDS or CDS, but very much interested in accelerating autonomous systems, autonomous vehicle operations, and so a piece of work that we have funded right now, we have a autonomous vehicle research cooperative, and we're working with industry partners in the AV industry to understand how do they articulate the safety case so that we're not reinventing from whole cloth everywhere we go, right? Can we pull together an industry best practice on the way industry understands their responsibilities for articulating safety? What are the metrics they use? What is the amount of data necessary to make that case? And in parallel, working with state DOTs to understand what is sufficiency? What is a sufficient safety case from a local DOT? And then how do you crosswalk those two conversations? Not that it's going to be easy, but a lot of what I think slows down the adoption of technology is just getting the different stakeholders who have to be involved speaking the same language, using the same terms, which is why we're so excited to work with OMF because you guys are tackling that. You have a different diverse stakeholder communities who have different motivations. They might define terms differently, but by specifying the APIs and the data standards that are necessary to have a conversation, you begin to wrestle through all of that vocabulary and the meaning of these words in a way that is really the heart of, I think, what's slowing down work in this space.
Thanks, Brian. And I'm glad you brought up AVs. And Laura, I want to shift to you because here we are in Los Angeles, one of the only a handful of cities in the U.S. that have robo-taxis deployed on your streets, available for commercial service. They're there. They're now a fixture of your streets. Let's talk about the good and the bad, especially as it relates to safety. And you're trying to create safer streets. How do robo-taxis fit into that picture?
Right. So I think anytime we have an introduction of a new mobility service, we, at least at LADOT, we welcome that. But we also want to be able to work closely with those companies and facilitate their movement as much as we can inform the way we design and plan our streets, not just for their movement, but for everyone's movement. Right now, we appreciate that the one commercial operator has come to the table and they're very collaborative with us. However, we know that they are just one when there are dozens and dozens waiting in the wings to be approved by the CPUC and DMV for commercial operations. But even with the one company who's at the table with us, it's information shared by them as we requested, and so it makes what we are able to do in pushing out the information much more limited. It makes our ability to see the bigger picture of how our streets are being used, how our limited curb space is being used, much more limited. From a safety perspective, it's really, we're waiting for that annual report, or we're waiting on informal reporting from our traffic officers or our police officers as to what incidents they've been facing and how we can be more responsive and better responding to those incidents. And so I think for us, it's really about having that information standardized so that we can plan, so that we can help you operate more efficiently, so that we can make our streets safer and anticipate where those vehicles will be traveling. Just a couple weeks ago, as we were here in Los Angeles, we're busy celebrating a little World Series championship. We were able to share information with those, with that commercial operator saying, hey, these streets will be closed off, please stay away. And I assume that that was super helpful for them and being able to push out that information to their customers. But we know that as of today, Waymo is open for service for anyone who downloads their app. We know that they will be increasing the number of vehicles that are within their service area to about 100 and probably doubling that before the end of the year. And so when you think about what that means on already busy streets in a finite location, not having that data in order to help facilitate movement of not just autonomous vehicles, but our transit, personally driven vehicles, pedestrian, bicyclists, the only way or the best way that we can plan and anticipate the movement of people is by having the data and being able to be responsive.
That's great. I had 2 weeks ago, I was in San Francisco actually, and had one of the first times seen the number of Waymo vehicles driving around the streets of San Francisco. And two things in particular warmed my heart in that experience. One was a Waymo vehicle actually fully pulling over to the curb, to make a pickup. There was this couple waiting there. The vehicle pulled over out of traffic, was able to get in, and then pulled back in. It worked like you'd expect it to work seamlessly. The second one, I was crossing the street in a crosswalk with a green walk sign, and a Waymo came up wanting to turn right, and had its blinker on, pulled, sort of slowed into the as it came toward me, and gave me a lot of space. I mean, way more space than I've had experiences with human-driven cars. So anyway, those two just quick data points were kind of fun things to observe in real life to a certain extent. Ryan, with NACTO, you've done a lot of work, especially from a design guideline perspective. Also, released the principles of AVs on city streets
Today.
Yes, it was released today. Oh, yes. Wow. Okay, so with that, what's next? That is a really important foundational sort of statement, for lack of a better word. What's next?
Yeah, so first of all of our knowledge comes from our members, and LADOT, SFMTA, and others have been sort of on the front lines of the autonomous vehicle robo-taxi world, and we're advocating for them. We've put out in the past a blueprint for autonomous urbanism, 2 versions of that, but today we released the principles for, I want to make sure I get it right, the principles for, exactly, autonomous vehicles on city streets. Okay, so here are those principles, and I don't want to talk about them. So we need to expect safety excellence from our AV partners. Obviously, like your anecdote, like programming a computer to yield to a pedestrian in a crosswalk when we can't guarantee every human driver to yield to a pedestrian when turning is a potential upgrade. But there's a whole bunch of other potential downgrades. What happens when there are scenarios where they freeze up, emergency vehicles can't get through, different scenarios. So these technologies are learning on our streets, and our cities have not had the ability to sort of set the rules around that. So what we would love to see is NHTSA and the federal government and US DOT to set safety standards for this work. A lot, what the playbook has been on the private sector side is to get, in essence, the permission slip to be on city streets from the state level, the DMV or the CPUC or other things. And because it's exciting new technology, a lot of our government leaders are excited about investment. We're competing for investment in different regions on a regional basis. So they'll give that permission slip and leave out the cities. The cities can't be left out. We need to empower the cities as the stewards of their streets. So, for example, issuing moving violations. The moving violation typically goes to the human operator. What are the systems that have been set up? Have the cities been empowered to issue violations and enforce their rules, whether that's their curb regulation rules, their moving violation rules, et cetera. A lot of enforcement questions in that regard. And the last is sort of really ultimately connects to OMF, and we call for the use of MDS by the robotaxi fleet operators is because our cities want to be able to plan for our values: equity, accessibility, sustainability. The deadhead miles that this can introduce, slowing down public transit, the waiting for passengers, all of the things we learned with the TNC rollout, the ability to make sure all areas of our cities are served. Are we just going to allow these companies to cream the most profitable markets and stay in the most profitable areas and not serve low-income areas, historically disadvantaged areas? So that requires some sort of lever to get the companies to the table, to talk to the cities, to make sure we can kind of plan this service together the way cities have stood up and insisted that the micromobility and the scooter industry do. But there's real questions as to whether cities will be able to do that in the AV robotaxi world.
Viktoriya, Laura, any reactions? I don't want to put you on the spot because the principles are new, but I'm sure your teams have been involved in helping draft them. Any reactions to this kind of national approach around AV principles?
Sure. So haven't read it yet, but I'll add it to my Goodreads list. I think we have to come at it from both ends, right? So having these national standards and guidance, I think, really helpful as this type of mobility option expands to other cities. Having some consistency from city to city, just like what MDS does, I think that I should facilitate kind of that collaboration. But I'll also say, I'll go back to something Ryan said at the very beginning, that, just as they say all politics are local, all planning is local. And so if we're entering a federal administration that is going to really push public-private partnerships, having one, national standards is helpful, but two, also having that information and having consistency so that as we're all telling the stories to drive those public-private partnerships and really push for whether it's investment or funding or policies, whether it's at the national, state, or local level, that, having that consistent story becomes really important. So really looking forward to seeing what NACTO has put out in that regard.
Yeah, similarly, we'll add this to my reading list as well. And yes, I agree with what you're saying, Laura. And I think fundamentally, Ryan, what you talked about is how do we consistency so that we know what's going on in our streets, so we can communicate also what we're seeing to the AV companies, and they can also ingest some of the data and be part of the operation, be part of their operations, like CDS, what's going on our curb, right? So it goes both ways. So it's that data exchange together so we can actually have mobility on our streets that works for everyone. Because that's ultimately, Stephen asked this question today, like, what are we ultimately trying to achieve, right, in an earlier session? And it's like really good mobility management system. And so having data consistency for all of our operators, whether it's AV, scooters, you name it, and translating that into really good mobility system management is what, and ultimately safety is where we're headed.
Brian, MITRE, you mentioned, is convening this AV research collaborative. Related to safety in particular, what is MITRE hoping some of the outcomes will be from that research effort?
Sure. There's three different work streams that we have in this research cooperative. And so, we are inviting OEMs and mobility providers to join. We have a core subset already. We've already begun work on a few research topics. One I mentioned before, which is AV safety framework, which is really about, as I said before, trying to accelerate decision making. How do we take the worlds of of safety as articulated by the industry and by local DOTs, and really try to line that up so they have a good common conversation. Be very clear about whether the needs of a local DOT are being addressed and how those line up. Two other areas of research. One is related to AV safety command centers. Just about every AV operator has some sort of a response, 24/7 command center safety response, and the organizations we've been speaking to are very interested in sort of benchmarking those against each other. It's a new type of operation. There's no set of regulations or guidelines from the federal government on what they have to contain, what they have to do, what the performance needs to be. So we're working with them to anonymously understand what the performance requirements and capabilities of the different safety command centers are, and then be able to provide that sort of a benchmark back to them to say, well, this is where your organization falls relative to your peers. That's something that we often have to do, is anonymize data, but still be able to present it back in a way where decision makers can see where they fall and where they may have shortcomings. The third area of work stream is related to what we call rules of the road. As mobility providers, AV manufacturers, they need to understand how to obey the laws across the nation. Every new market they want to move into, well, they're very inconsistent, I guess, across the nation. The way that traffic laws are articulated vary quite a bit. How they are interpreted, whether they're maybe articulated the same way, they can be interpreted differently. And there's a lot of tremendously vague language, like stay well clear of the pedestrian. Okay, well, what does well clear mean? And really, and not exaggerating at all, a lot of it really boils down to the ticketing officer at the time, whether they believed that under the circumstances that vehicle was well clear of the pedestrian or not. So what we're trying to do is save our nation the cost of having to figure that out, a dozen different times, and really trying to get the industry to come together, cooperate on a national rules of the road interpretation and database, so that when you move into a new market, this is really what's expected. This is how far away from the pedestrian you really should be. So that's something we're working on. And there is something else that I hear, a theme that I pick up here too as well, is there is, in addition to what you might call the traffic rules, the traffic laws, there are the local contextual or even preferences or expectations too that go beyond the traffic laws. Like for instance, if you want to enforce equity, we want to ensure that this operation is servicing these areas. That's not a law, it's not a traffic law, but it is sort of a requirement of operation or expectation of operation. So there's that other layer of data or information that we want to be able to codify in a consistent way and make available to these operators so they don't have to discover that as well.
So let's shift gears slightly. And a question for everyone here. You're related to Vision Zero. Now, the title of our session here is the intersection of data, innovation, and safer streets. And I think data, innovation, technology can certainly help lead to safer streets. From a Vision Zero perspective, kind of a two-part question, and you don't all have to answer this, so just kind of throwing it out there. What excites you about the future of Vision Zero in your cities specifically, or more in general? And then what worries you about Vision Zero?
I mean, I can go first, take a stab at it. So San Francisco we adopted Vision Zero 10 years ago. So this year we did a retrospective, and we're about to entertain, revamp sort of, if you would, for that word, of what Vision Zero looks like into the future for our city. And we've been doing a lot of thinking and reflecting. What is it going to look like? And actually, what do we really need to get there? And I think I'm going to talk about a couple of things. One is about partnership, and partnership in different forms. What we've come to realize is that the DOT alone cannot deliver on Vision Zero. I think we all knew that intuitively, but I just like really want to stress that, and that includes partnership across within the city. Like our health department has been a wonderful partner to us, but what about practically, really frankly, the fire department or the police department in its enforcement? I heard some noise. But so how do I get my sister agencies to come to the table to really embrace Vision Zero so that it's not DOT alone that's carrying the water for it? And I think I'm excited about that, but also, you know, truly it is a very big challenge for us. And then partnership with the private sector, to your point, Ryan, earlier, like it's important to partner for us and look together for data. And so I have a model that is a high injury network that looks at the past events to tell me where things have happened. But what about looking at a predictive model, which our Department of Public Health is exploring, and we're just at the beginning stages of that? How can we use technology to look at a predictive model and anticipate where things are going to occur so that I use my very limited resources to put infrastructure into that places, or frankly, in partnership with my police department, maybe do some enforcement or what have you. And so what does that technology for predictive model looks like, and having some standards so that when we talk about what a close call might look like for San Francisco, okay, maybe we define that as, you know, a vehicle coming within 10 feet of a pedestrian or a bicyclist in 1 second because we think that's going to collide. And how do we get standards around that understanding of a close call and move forward with a predictive model? So this is an opportunity, I think, where maybe we can partner and see there. I've heard about lots of different technologies in this day alone and previously that are using AI and that are looking to that future. And so how do we meld those together? What worries me probably most is funding. And I would be remiss not to really harp on that here. I think funding is very difficult from an operations perspective, and also capital funding, which is how in San Francisco we fund lots of our infrastructure. And with this new administration, a question was asked earlier, what does this mean for funding for Vision Zero? I don't know. I'm worried about it. And so how do we find the money? And I think to that end, how do we use technology to tell the story for why this is so important to get the funding that we need and the support for it?
I'll just add, I think, and I'll start with what concerns me is something that Viktoriya mentioned, that, you know, the idea that Vision Zero or safety projects and infrastructure aren't effective when we know they are, when we have the data that demonstrates that once installed, the streets are safer, fatalities go down, crashes go down. And so the issue isn't so much, does this infrastructure work? I think for us, at least in the city of Los Angeles, is how can we implement more faster, quicker, and get it to all the places that really need it in a way that's more efficient. And so I think that's where, you know, I'm most looking forward to, and challenging times as the city of LA is looking at financially. How can we be more efficient with how we implement this infrastructure? If we know what works, how can we standardize it? How can we cut some time on the planning side? And I'm sorry to planners, I'm a planner. But how do we standardize some of this infrastructure that we know works and we just get it done? But it's also, how do we use technology? How do we leverage technology where it's not an either or, but it's a supplement to infrastructure that we know works? And so how do we support our, you know, traffic control officers, our traffic enforcement? How do we help LAPD when their resources might also be very constrained, in making sure that technologies are there to be able to make our streets safer? And so looking at how, technologies can help us make our streets safer is something that I'm looking forward to. And how can we, you know, as we go back into our offices and start to look at what corridors are next, how can we be more efficient with what we're putting out in our streets with limited resources, limited funding potentially? but how do we keep the story going? And then I'll say lastly is, how do we humanize the data? How do we tell that story? Going back to all planning is local, how do we put a face to those numbers so that as resources become very limited, and there's those difficult conversations, we can tell people who are most affected, who are the constituents that are carrying the brunt of having streets that aren't being invested in and that are not safe.
Cool.
You know, Viktoriya makes a great point about predictive analytics, and I can't help but draw a parallel to aviation, where they went through that transition, right? So in the mid '80s, a commercial aviation safety team was formed, and it was a public-private partnership. Airlines really getting together, beginning to agree to share data. Because they knew that they needed to move from a retrospective view of safety, like what happened, you know, how many crashes happened already, how many people died, and saying that, you know, the nation just does not tolerate, aviation accidents at that rate. I think it's fair to say, you know, maybe even before the term was coined, at least in the aviation world, Vision Zero was sort of an expectation. We've always had a much higher expectation of safety in aviation. So that group got together and said, we are going to intentionally move from empirical data analysis of past events to predictive analytics. And we are going to look at the things that didn't happen but could have happened. What were the near misses? What are the situations that generate risk? We want to predict situations that generate risk and attack those in advance, proactively. And I think you make a great point that Vision Zero is forcing us to have that same approach in surface transportation. Is, you know, we're never going to eliminate accidents if our data is based on accidents that happened. We're only going to eliminate accidents by preventing them from happening in the first place, what Vision Zero calls for, which, you know, really calls on a whole new world of modeling and analysis that maybe previously hasn't been as developed.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the aviation, and I would say if for those of you that are fans of Freakonomics podcast, anybody, people familiar with that? Yeah, I'm sure, right? They have an amazing series on this very topic that talks about, like 2 or 3 podcasts that talks about what happened in the 80s with the aviation and predictability, and its application actually currently to autonomous vehicles. So I recommend it.
All right. Ryan, I want you to bring us home with this last question related to the connection between the curb and street safety. So from your thinking about both the NACDO network of cities, but also your very specific experience, leading city DOTs, working in city DOTs, what does innovative curb management mean for safer streets?
Well, I think to connect it to the Vision Zero, one of the things that Vision Zero has been an incredible frame for us to sort of position the work. There are these 40,000 deaths per year, and cities jumped in and said, we need to take this on. But I think we've kind of run up after 10 years up to the limits to it. And our members know that you can't just say Vision Zero and get your bike lane on Valencia put in, right? Like your small businesses are still going to fight for their parking. You're still having this kind of trench warfare project by project. And I think we unfortunately moved away from a full mobility system frame. I think like the planners, the transportation departments get that they want to build for their cities a mobility system that is the most efficient, the most safe, sustainable, that just works for the city, that generates economic development, that generates just gets people to the school, jobs, opportunities in an efficient, affordable way. And building out a bike network, keeping transit from getting stuck in congestion, making walking a viable option where you don't feel stressed out and fear is part of making that transportation system work. And Vision Zero was in essence a narrowing of the frame. It was kind of like, we just need to make sure people don't die. And it's not a joyful frame, right? Like cities are supposed to be joyful and connective and community places. So to bring this to your question, the curb management, I think, is a bit about returning to that full mobility picture frame. Like it can get very wonky and down in the weeds around data and loading zones and no parking signs and drop off and pick up, but it's so that the bus can move and be on time and be reliable, so that someone's not late to work and they lose their job. It can mean so that, what was one of the dominant features of this last national public policy debate we had, that people heard their voices on November 5th, not having affordable housing in our cities and communities around the country. Well, the solution to that is a lot more housing. And if we're gonna have a lot more housing in our cities, we need to move around efficiently, because if every single person who moves into those housing, every single person who's 17 or above has their own private vehicle, well, where are they gonna park it and how are they gonna move it around? So I think we need to kind of start to connect this to like the real problems that people sort of experience. And so what are the top problems? Affordable housing, accessing jobs, like paying the bills. And so the curb data and efficient curbs are part of this overall system and this overall vision for like cities being the wonderful places that can be, where people can meet their needs and they don't have to work 2 jobs and they don't have to stress and they're unhappy and disconnected and isolated and
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the curb management's connection to affordable housing. I mean, that it seems like a non sequitur, but there's actually a really strong, both connection and necessity to move in that direction. So thanks for that. Ryan, Viktoriya, Laura, Brian, thank you so much for sharing your experience, your wisdom in this area. There's so much more we could dig into on this topic of safety, and we certainly will in future conversations. But for the moment, can you please give my panelists a round of applause? Thank you.